welcome. My name is Per-Erik Eriksson. I represent the Swedish Computer Association, and I'm also the host for these Let's Talk events. We started quite some time ago. We started with the Let's Talk Security, or as its Swedish name is called, Prata säkerhet med oss. The name Let's Talk is deliberate, and the idea behind, in Swedish, Prata säkerhet med oss, talk security with us, or Let's Talk Security, is to simply convey the meaning that we want interaction. It is okay, more than okay, in fact. We encourage you to interact and ask questions, give us comments, etc. You don't have to do it, of course, but you are very, very, very welcome to do so. I said that I'm representing the Swedish Computer Association, in other words, Dataföreningen. And, well, I'm a member of the board. I'm also the spokesperson for security and integrity, or privacy, as well as the person who started these Let's Talk activities. Today, I'm the co-host, as is Olle Johansson. And the reason we're doing the hosting today is because we're deeply involved in the new EU law, the EU Cyber Resilience Act. Normally, in my day-to-day work, I'm a security consultant at HiQ. But I don't. Does everyone know about the Swedish Computer Association? If not, I guess I should add that it's a pretty old association. We started 74 years ago, so we're coming up on our 75th anniversary, and we're going to do quite a lot of activities in the 75th year. A lot more information about us can be said, but I think I'll stop there. And Ulla, who is you? Who are you? And what are we going to talk about today?
That's a very good question. Who am I? I've been working with networking and internet-related questions for far longer than I want to admit, as well as security. I'm a consultant and an open source developer, and this CRA proposed legislation affects me in all my roles. So I spent quite a lot of time digging through it and taking part of discussions. And the topic for today is the proposed Cyber Resilience Act. And it's important to remember that this is a proposal still. It's out for review. They're asking for public comments, and we're working on a few responses. And I think it's important to get involved because, as we will point out, there are some areas that are either unclear or basically wrong or dangerous. So we need to discuss that. And I also would like to emphasize what Per-Erik said, that we're very open for discussion. In some cases, we will say simply that, well, there's a slide coming later, so let's postpone discussion. But since you haven't seen the slides and we have, we can take that liberty. We have a meeting chat. If you ask questions there, we will try to keep an eye on them and answer as we move along. I think we're ready for some CRA rock and roll, Per-Erik. Are we ready to start?
I think so too.
Okay. So the problem, well, during the last couple of years, we have had a few quite big incidents. Some of them were caused by plain old bugs that someone discovered, and some of them were an entirely different thing. I think most of us are aware of the log4shell incident in the log4j library. The incidents become so big, so they got names, and in some cases logotypes, like the OpenSSL Heartbleed incident that has the heart in this slide. Those were security bugs that affected a lot of systems and a lot of manual work. In my work, I've got many questions from current customers and former customers about the log4j incident. And I think many people here in the room also were involved in some role. Those are security bugs, but in SolarWinds and a few other pieces of software and systems, we had supply chain attacks. Some actor was inserting bad code in a manufacturing company's stack. And later, when they released a new version of the software, it was distributed to customers and used. In Sweden, one of these attacks caused a grocery chain to close for a couple of days and restore all the systems. So software supply chain attacks are something we have to understand and have to work with. And in addition to third-party products that we use to create our own products, our own software most likely have security issues, and we need procedures and systems to handle those. So the EU has looked into this and said, well, we really need to start doing something not to repeat the log4j, log4shell problem. And the problem here was really for customers and users to understand if they were affected, and if that was the case, how much? What was the priority action to take? The legislation proposal as it stands now has a lot of fancy words and expressions. Cybersecurity is something many people talk about, but very few people understand, and it's kind of become a fashionable word to use. In Sweden, the Royal Academy of Sciences, Ingenjörsvetenskapsakademin, have a definition where they say that cybersecurity is protecting against external attacks. And then we have other layers of security. They all work hand in hand. But when you hear politicians and other people talk about cybersecurity, I don't think they have this, I would say, better definition of it. But it would be good if we can continue with it in our discussions. And when Per-Erik and I have discussed this, we also see that things go hand in hand. The legislation mentions privacy and GDPR issues. So there's an interaction between security, safety, and privacy that is important to remember when we look at this. But the EU is clearly saying that the market by itself doesn't work as expected. The costs for handling cybersecurity is way too high, and manufacturers need to take security seriously throughout a product's life cycle. That means from birth to death of a product. And they're giving manufacturers a time limit. They're saying 24 months after the legislation is in place, new products placed on the market will have to have a much higher level of cybersecurity than the current set of products. In addition, they're also forcing manufacturers to act in a very transparent way towards the customers. As an open source developer, I'm very used to this. We publish our issues early. We help our customers to mitigate the problems. And we have a very clear process in most projects, not all, but most projects, on how to handle security. But many commercial companies are not used to this. And EU is forcing us to do that. And the focus on this legislation is to manage and fix vulnerabilities when creating new products, security by design, another buzzword expression, and also transparency. And that will be very important throughout the process. So then the next question is really, which software? I would say almost all. There are a few product lines that have their own legislation, like military, medical, and cars. There are exceptions for those. Software as a service, as a standalone product, is covered by the NIS2 directive and other cybersecurity legislation. So they're exempt from this. But everything else, mobile applications to embedded systems, and when you have a cloud service, software as a service, that is a back end of something, then the software as a service is included as well. So there are very few products, software standalone, app store or others, or embedded systems that will be able to avoid this. They're also very clear that anyone that places a product on the European Union market is affected. If you're a manufacturer, or if you place your logotypes on a product you import from elsewhere, or if you're an importer or distributor, then you're responsible. So they're very clear that all products placed on the European market will be under this legislation. Now,
which means, did you hear what Olle just said? All products. Can you imagine the amount of companies affected by that?
Yes, and also I would say that if you go back or left with that, because when I have read the proposal once, and my reflection was, when it comes to this, it is that you will sort of inherit. It also states that you should be, I don't understand, but if you should be responsible for the, the previous, how to say, the previous, vad säger man?
Say it in
the
Swedish.
One that delivers, yeah, the one that delivers. If you are an importer, then it's the OEM, or if you are a distributor, then it's the importer. So it's, if I am an integrator and using these, I buy a product from the distributor, I've basically,
well, then the distributor placed it on the market. The key phrase here is placing on the market.
Okay, so on the market. So that's where it sort of goes to the. So the integrator, will he be the customer? Because normally he sort of implement the stuff, and you buy it and sell it as a service to some other end customer. So
Yep.
That was my how will this work in reality?
I think resellers and system integrators, unless they act as an importer, they're quite clear here. There are, I would say, other best current practices and possibly legislations concerning them.
Yeah, okay.
So the first phase here, after legislation comes into effect, is after 1 year, 12 months, for all products that exist on the market today and are sold today, you need to have a system, a process to manage vulnerabilities, to report vulnerabilities, and inform your customers. And for exploitable vulnerabilities, stuff that's known to be exploitable or have been exploited, you need to report within 24 hours to ENISA, the EU Union body for security. And they will, in fact, inform all the country member states, various instances. So 12 months, that's a very, very short time for a lot of products. In phase 2, and this applies to new products, you need to have a much higher cybersecurity level than existing products. You need to build them secure. You need to secure your supply chain and prioritize cybersecurity from design to decommission. This is in fact an extension of the current CE marking. So it's the same CE, but with a new category of certification. And customers will also get free security updates for 5 years after the product is placed on the market. They have the transparency comes back here. They have access to vulnerability information and the vendor's risk assessment and a very comprehensive, detailed technical documentation. And this has to be updated once a year or for every product release. So the manufacturer or the OEM or distributor gets a lot of new responsibilities here, which will be very interesting for companies such as retail companies importing stuff from Asia. Something that's emphasized quite a lot in the similar regulation in the US is the secure software supply chain. After a couple of attacks, SolarWinds being the most obvious one, it's written in many parts of the legislation here that if something happens, an ESA will come in or the representative and try to verify your build systems and the log files and everything. And there's a lot of work going on here in the open source community. We'll come back to that later. But you can't really continue building something on a laptop, signing it with something and just pushing it out to the store. You need to have verifiable build processes. And today, almost all the products we have third-party components, both commercial libraries and tools, as well as open source libraries and tools. And in addition, we have our own code. We may have written our own protocols over network, and we have our own hardware. And one interesting detail here is that the legislation concerns all the connected hardware and everything that's indirectly connected. So even if you have serial cables, you have your own protocol over radio or something else, those devices will be included.
And that raises a question. What about, for example, an Excel spreadsheet? Well, you might think that's excluded, but that's not necessarily the case. So web browsers, Word documents or word processors, etc., all of those things are and can be included in the CRA.
See that we have questions about medical device regulation. I'm not an expert in that area, Fredrik, but there are exceptions pointing to certain regulations. We can come back to that in another discussion. And Per will come back to ESPOM very soon, and I'll answer your question. It's a good question. And that's now, in fact. The way you work with your products to actually monitor vulnerabilities is a tool called the software bill of materials. The software bill of materials is something that in the US, all the government institutions will require from all the manufacturers. And they will also require online update on vulnerabilities in those ESPOMs. So there are new standard formats for reporting the manufacturer's assessment of a specific vulnerability. So what you do is you create bill of materials for your own code, and you get them from your vendors. So if you're buying an IoT development kit, that should come with an API so you can regularly get updated SBOMs. And it applies to your open source components as well. The SBOM is simplified a list of the software you use and the versions of it you use. You match that with a vulnerability database. There are several out there depending upon the tool sets. If you use containers or not, Docker containers or Kubernetes, if you use Java or not. Black Duck is an example that many people use. So from checking that or just reading various mailing lists from open source software or others, you get to your vulnerabilities. And for each one, you have to do an assessment. If you look at some open source components, they have many modules like the Apache web server or Nginx web server or the Asterisk open source PBX that I've been responsible for. The vulnerability may not be in the code you execute. And then in a vulnerability assessment report in a format called VEX, you can say that according to us, this vulnerability doesn't apply to our product. But you can also say that it's under investigation or it affected and fixed by release, blah, blah, blah. Important to notice is that you're responsible for all the releases out there in the customer installation base. So you need to run this for your old products as well, old versions, as long as you haven't put them out of life and have end of life of them. One thing that is problematic in the current text is open source. I think the authors really wanted to exclude open source, but they didn't want to create a loophole for companies like Google or others that release a lot of open source, but still should be held responsible for what they're doing. But the text produced is very dangerous. Many open source companies, they sell support, they sell training, they have to get a living and pay their food at ICA Maxi. So the current text is rather harmful, and I have a link here to Internet Society that have reacted on this. And I know that Linux Foundation and Open Source Security Foundation have also been in discussion with the EU about this. This also puts companies like GitHub or public repositories like NPM or others in a very strange position. If you say that, this doesn't apply to us, I'll continue as before, well, you're in the risk of causing a lot of damage to the company. The fines are set very high in order to point with a full hand and say, you better fix this or you should not sell. So 15 million euro or a 2.5% of the total worldwide revenue for your company, whichever is higher.
There is an additional fact to this, which I find quite interesting. And that is that normal organization companies, they risk paying fines. However, what has been put into the act as well is quite clear text specifying that each country must assign sufficient resources for actually following up on the act. And that is something which, to my knowledge, is not in the GDPR Act, for example. So it really does seem like the EU is interested in, well, basically forcing everyone to start fixing software, secure software. Okay, go on.
I remembered while you were speaking that I didn't properly answer Per Kangaroo on the chat. The SBOM position in the CRA is very unclear. It clearly states that companies, the tool to use to handle vulnerabilities and track them is SBOM. They also have a clause where they say that they can come back later to define the format required for SBOM, because there are several standards out there right now, like Cyclone DX or SPDX or others. But there's no stipulation to provide it to customers. I think customers may start requiring this. In parts of me hope that they should, because it will be much easier to track something like Log4j issues down than in your organization if you have a complex systems and networks. But I don't know why they open up for specifying the SBOM format because there's no requirements to distribute it.
Well,
and there's also some text saying the SBOM shall contain at least the top level components, but that doesn't help.
They actually open up for several definitions to be changed. But I think one of the things that needs to be done in that case is for them to also ask the market. We'll see what happens.
Yep.
As for the requirement of SBOM, it's quite clear that authorities, as well as the certifying organizations, they have a clear requirement or authority to see and request the SBOM. But as Olle points out, there is really no clear definition in the text specifying that a customer has the right to see an SBOM.
Nope. So, the short-term to-do list, if you're a manufacturing organization or an importer distributor, is to define the gap between the current product and development process and something that's CRA compliant, and determine whether it's possible to make the current set of products compliant or not. And we're working on refining documents, processes, and checklists. But here's one idea of a simplified checklist. That is, start with checking all your third-party dependencies. Contact the vendors, check the open source project, see what's going on. Look into your supply chain. How do you actually build your software? How do you release your software? Check the vulnerability handling. Do you have any process for that? If not, you need to set it up. You have 12 months after legislation to have it up and running. Your customers should be able to report securely to you about vulnerabilities they suspect they found in your products, and you should be able to inform customers as well as authorities. Secure your product code. That's easy to say. Sorry, Per-Erik.
No problem. What Olle just said, you have 12 months after the law has been implemented to start reporting on vulnerabilities. That includes not only new software, but also existing software currently being sold.
Yep. Secure your product code. Make sure you have access to the right knowledge. Sign contracts with necessary consultants. You need, according to CRA, to do annual reviews of the code and the protocols and your systems. And it's important that you stay up to date. Use sessions like this and organizations like ours to share ideas and learn about best current practice, because there's so much new things here for a lot of people, so we need to work together. So our conclusion is that, well, you can't say no to this. I mean, it's a good idea to make better products and improve the cybersecurity. So the general idea here is a good one. We believe that companies that take leadership here will benefit and get a better market position. If they're open and transparent in what they're doing, that's a really good thing. Open source is, of course, important to me as an open source developer. We have to get much better protection in the CRA. There's a lot of devils in the details. They use state-of-the-art security and secure by default without really good definitions here. A lot of stuff in the legislation is too deep down in certain technology, and that makes it not very resistant to change. We heard a lot of comments. We had a lot of discussions and a few meetings like this. Some people say that, oh, this is too complex. It'll be a blocker for innovation we need in the union. Some people say that this will lead to products and services leaving the EU market, like we saw with GDPR. Certain websites just shut down for the European Union. We heard comments about the CRA is too detailed. It's very hard to pass into a law because laws should be more time insensitive. And we also heard that some people have equipment that just simply can't be updated. And that's a problematic place to be. And those were all the pictures I had. Let's see if we have questions.
We do.
We have Alan
again,
Strand. Yeah, that's the text of the open source part in paragraph 10. And it's really, really hard to parse. And you need to read an article by Olaf Kolkman from the Internet Society there as well. Any other questions? Feel free to turn on your mics and video. Yeah, I'll provide the link in the chat.
I wrote in the chat earlier on, and you said in one of the first slides that medical products were excluded from the CRA directive.
Medical products that are covered by a specific other regulation. I'll try to find that for you.
Okay, because we have products that is covered by the medical device regulation. And if they are excluded, we will be happy not to have more regulations. It's quite cumbersome to just fulfill that.
I think the idea was that where you have regulations that regulate the cybersecurity of products in other areas like military and medical, they should be excluded from this. This is to cover the holes.
But the medical device regulation says you should be up to state of the art in all areas, UX, whatever, GDPR, security, whatever, all areas.
Yeah, then CRA defines the state of the art now then.
Yeah, so we have to fulfill it anyway.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hans asks in the chat, cloud and IoT. I know that you came in late. Software as a service is excluded unless they act as a backend for devices. Then it's included. And of course, IoT is included.
However,
both industrial, business use and home use. They even mention devices with usage that are specific. They have an expression. They mention toys and that kind of stuff, especially where you have kids involved.
Just have a question on that. If you build modern system, you're talking about edge computing. So a service is constituted buy a backend service and something running in the edge, the front.
Yeah.
And probably you can end up having the same components if you use like Alpine Unix and MicroPython.
Yep.
So it's from a PLM perspective, it's a nightmare when you have the cloud. You just have one pipeline. It's very easy to update, but you have 1 million cars and some owners refuse to go to the workshop. Then you have to keep track of all the vulnerabilities related to the owner of the device. So I don't know. Yeah.
There is some text that is a bit unclear, but it says that you should use automatic updates where applicable. I parse that as a requirement for some sort of fleet management of, I mean, all the IoT devices and all the gateways used for them, controllers.
It's pretty clear that some areas are excluded from the Act. For example, cars, i.e. automobiles, and medical devices are covered by other laws. And that means that this law does not apply to those things. However, in those laws, for example, the things that cover cars, they have pretty much the same requirements. So actually, the GDPR, it's not clearly stated as to how to implement proper IT security, but it's now becoming more clear that that law is cooperating, I guess I should say, with this law as well as the NIS2 directive. So they're going to be interconnected in several ways. For example, our own cloud systems only, they're actually not covered by this law, but there's another law covering that.
I agree. I think this is like a how to say that they interact with like GDPR, because when GDPR was released, and it was like, okay, we shall do security by design or privacy by design and privacy by default and all of that. But this is more of trying to, how to say, I don't know, institute maybe not be the right wording, but it seems like it's more on steer it, how to say, yeah.
Daniel had a very good comment in the chat. The software as a service is excluded, but not if you have devices connected to it. But he asks whether if I run a telephony service in the cloud and a customer buys their own phone and connects it, and that's the power of interoperability and open protocols. I don't think you can be seen as the manufacturer or the one that placed that phone on the market. The actor, or in the terms of the legislation, the economic operator that put that phone on the market will be responsible for that phone.
Yeah.
But it's a very good question. I'll remember that one.
But I think one of the now we're talking about consumer products, but when it comes to, I would say, corporate products or commercial products or cases, then I think when I read the proposal, then it was, I think there was someone mentioned it in this chat as well, you know, when you get security by defaults, and then I think it's not clear on how to say what is a secure product, or what is the responsibility of making the product secure when it comes to this delivery chain of supply chain sort of stuff, because I will see that it's the fines and all this, you know, if we find that there is a product that it is not enough cyber secure, who should we blame and who should have the fine? Then it is not clear to me, at least when I read it on you know, will I have fines due to some how to say supply in the previous in the chain that
well, if you don't react then you get fined. But if you have systems in place and you get information and you react on it in due time,
Okay.
then that's another thing. And some people are worried that, oh, there will always be bugs. How do I handle them? Well, there will always be bugs. The law doesn't say that you should be bug free, but when you find them or someone else find them for you, react.
Yeah, you should be
react with
transparent.
transparency.
Yeah, exactly. But more, yeah. But then it's maybe like the GDPR. There will be these principles on. Yes, I am transparent. I am. That might be the.
But of course, there will be a best current practice being developed, and we'll have another seminar where we go through. For instance, mention the OpenSSF, SLSA, and other ways to measure the state of our project and where they are in the supply chain security process.
Yes. But I think I might as well share this mind map because there are a few things in the law which becomes quite clear when you look at it in some ways. So let me see if I can share my screen.
I'll stop sharing then.
Yeah, and you should now be able to see my desktop and a mind map. Can you do that?
Not yet.
I better click share as well. Now you should be able to. So what we have here is we've simply taken the law and made it into a mind map. But when I did that, I noticed a few things. They have the legislative financial statement, and in that there are a few things summed up in a few short words. The first one is the main objectives, and the very first one is create conditions for the development of secure products with digital elements. And the other one is create conditions allowing users to take cybersecurity into account when selecting and using products with digital elements. And then there are 4 specific objectives to ensure that manufacturers improve the security of products, to ensure a coherent cybersecurity framework facilitating compliance for hardware and software products, and to enhance the transparency of security properties of products. And last but not least, to enable businesses and consumers to use products with digital elements securely. That's what this law is all about. And I think this sums it up quite well. Additionally, someone was going to say something.
No, I just agree with you.
Okay. Additionally, the EU has also looked into the pros and cons. And they start with the proposal would bring significant benefits to the various stakeholders. And for businesses, it would prevent divergent security rules for products with digital elements, and in so doing, decrease compliance cost for implementing. And it would reduce the number of cyber incidents. I think those are quite worthwhile goals. And then they also state that this is going to cost quite a lot of money. On the other hand, the overall main total amount of money is quite big, so it's going to be interesting. And this one, what they're actually saying is that properly used, this is a potential business opportunity or a business advantage also for users. As for developers, well, there's going to be some additional work and cost for security requirements, conformity assessments, documentation is not to be underestimated. So this is going to cost quite a lot, but the estimated market value is pretty big. So this might actually be worthwhile. And us as business users and citizens, etc., we can foresee, and the EU foresees, that we will have to pay a bit more for things. But on the other hand, on balance, this could actually, properly implemented, reduce cost. And whether or not it actually does, there is another factor. One of my former colleagues, he was at Telia, he was a quality expert, and he told me again and again and again that most companies have a problem. Bad quality costs approximately 20% of their annual turnover. So if we can use this thing to improve the way we do work and improve our quality, well, that could actually lead to us saving money instead of spending money. Now, I'm not going to promise that, but it's a thought that I think we should keep in mind. Okay.
Okay. Can I take back the screen?
Yes, you can.
If
Go ahead.
Because Sandro asked a question here, and I noticed that there was a slide missing. So I hope you see this slide on classification. Products are in this law classified in 3 different categories, named 0, 1, and 2, which all engineers love. The default category will include most of the products, and for those you have self-certification, but you're still responsible. But there are 2 classes of products that will require third-party assessment and some sort of certification. For all products, they say that there should be regular reviews by security audits for class 1 and 2 external companies. But what Sandra asks here is that, well, do you depend on vulnerability researchers? Yes, I do think so, but they should also be in employment for pen testing and other testing. I think pen testing is one part, but making sure all the code and the protocols is secure is extremely important, as well as the legislation parts that says that all data stored on a device should be confidential and have integrity assurances. So there's a lot of work to do in this. But my experience from open source, when I worked with Asterisk, we got reports from vulnerability researchers that claimed there was a problem in the software, and in 100% of the cases, they were right. So we fixed that, and we modified our programming guidelines and reviewed the rest of the code. And for each report, we did that. So we secured more and more, and we learned more and more about the process. I think that's what's going to happen in enterprise development projects. You need to consider cybersecurity. You need to bring it in from design to development to updates and decommission. Thank you, Sandro, for the question.
Okay. Any other questions?
Hans here. Any idea how to map this framework to different ecosystems? For modern ecosystem, I think you have a smaller gap when you go for all legacy, COBOL and Java, but it's hardly but very hard to set up a secure supply chain.
Well, COBOL, I haven't touched in many years. I'm old enough to know what it is. But Java has gotten substantial funding from the Open Source Software Foundation's project Alpha Omega, as well as Python and Node.js, and there's another project. Alpha Omega got funded by Microsoft, Amazon, and Google in order to assist development projects to start checking over their supply chain, their behavior in regards of handling vulnerabilities, securing commits, securing from bad actors, injecting code with peer reviews and others. So there's a lot of funding for the larger projects available. But yeah, there's work to do.
Is there any reference project, so that's a good example, how you build a fully traceable software supply chain, including the tools that you can use as a blueprint for other ecosystem?
I think that's a very, very good question. And in a coming seminar we are preparing, we haven't scheduled it yet, but it'll be in a few weeks. We'll go through the new tool sets we have seen, and hopefully you guys can share with us what you see as well, so we can build knowledge together. But there is a lot of tooling coming out and a lot of changes. If you start with looking at SigStore and OpenSSF, OpenSSF is kind of the umbrella organization that works with a lot of these tool sets. You'll see there's tons of changes.
I guess we should explain or add that what Olle is referring to right now is that we're starting a fourth Let's Talk activity, which is going to take place every fourth week, week on Thursday from 12 to 1 o'clock, regarding the Cyber Resilience Act. I haven't decided whether we should call it Let's Talk the Cyber Resilience Act or Let's Talk CRA. But the Swedish Computer Association is starting this now. And the first such activity is now next week on Thursday.
Right now we're using a lot of the discussions in these meetings as input to the formal response from the organization on the CRA. So it's very good to hear what you're saying and your opinions here.
I've been tasked with collating the formal response for the Swedish Computer Association to the authorities. So we're actually writing this and trying to get as input to that response. So anyone who has some thoughts or ideas or findings, you're most welcome to give me or Olle that information.
So just some thought process here. So in the end of the day, I mean, I think no one is objecting to that. Security would be a good thing to have. I think the big question here is going to be who should be accountable for what aspect of it, and should it be acceptable that open source in certain cases would be excluded from this liability? And if so, how do we make sure that is a appropriate exclusion that doesn't create the loophole that people just gonna exploit?
Yeah, it's a very problematic question.
Yeah. So one way would obviously be to say that it's, I mean, either you take this accountability for managing open source and making sure that it's secure, Alternatively, you are choosing to proactively donate to a fund that is funding development and security, validation and management of open source.
Mm-hmm.
So then you either
I wouldn't
own
be
the accountability.
I wouldn't be surprised if we see that happening going forward.
Yeah, and because in the end of the day, I think all of us want open source to be secure, it's possible to use for various critical applications and to be dependable on. But the question is, how do we get there, and how do we incentivize relevant organizations to drive that? And if, for example, one input that can be given from Sweden is that, sure, you can either take accountability and own up to that and take penalties if you fail. Alternatively, we could propose, for example, saying, well, there should be a fund that companies, if they don't want to take the accountability for open source, is able to donate to, and then they have to donate at minimum whatever number is a appropriate number.
Interesting.
Yeah, because then you're getting to the point that security has a tangible cost, and that tangible cost you can either take internally if you're knowing how to deal with it. Of course, whatever is your commercial code that you're delivering, you have to be accountable for. But your open source components that you depend upon, if you can't secure them yourself and take accountability for them, then you're able to donate a fair market rate for security practice. If that is 1%, 2% to 5%, I have no opinion about. But at some point, you're getting to saying, this is what I'm willing to do.
Yeah, in my mind, I was hoping that the notion that, oh, we get open source for free and it's cool and they do everything we ask for free will disappear. Open source is just another business model, which goes in line with what you're saying. And I was hoping that users that embed open source in products would have more interaction with open source projects and maybe a bit more support in development resources or funding or interaction, reporting bugs and working with them, because maintaining your own version of an open source project will be much higher cost than contributing your changes back.
Sure.
Interacting
but even if you contribute your changes, doesn't mean that you are, from a legal point of view, certain that you can maintain the accountability against this regulation.
No.
So the point would be, if you...
But accountability mainly is if the open source project or someone else opens a CVE and you ignore it.
Yes, or if you find that your solution is actively being exploited against some reason, and you're not able to address that quick enough.
Yep.
But anyway,
okay.
Thanks for driving this, and then it's good. I appreciate all of the effort.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'd better say the following. We've passed 1 o'clock now, and the meaning, normally this is between the hours of 12 and 1 o'clock. If we want to continue a few minutes more, from my point of view, it's okay, but ordinarily we should stop now. So do we want to continue discussing things, or should we end?
I think we can close the recording and say thank you. And those who want to stay can stay and chat with us for a few minutes.
Okay. So we close the official meeting, and anyone who wants to continue talking and discussing is welcome to stay.
You're welcome,
I guess
Karl-Erik.
We'd better say that we can continue talking until, say, 1:15 or 20 minutes past 1 at the most. And before everyone leaves, on the dfs.se, we will send out an invite for the next periodic session, so you get the chance to attend those as well. Okay.
Any more questions, opinions, suggestions?
I've been in contact with Venova, and they fund a project called RISE, and they have an upcoming event in the end of the month. And they have a working group for software or secure supply chain, but it's not started yet. And I've been in contact with Martin Barling to drive this, because not only Europe, it also comes from White House. If you read the cybersecurity.
Yeah, I mentioned the NIST guidelines earlier.
Yeah.
But they're much more clear on that you need an interface to an SBOM and you need vulnerability reports. And that's driving a lot of work in the IETF as well as in the Linux Foundation currently.
Yeah, and I think this SBOM is a huge elephant if you want to cover all the different ecosystem and build system. So what I did when I was on Ericsson, I focus on one ecosystem, low-hanging fruit, Alpine, that is very well designed.
Yep.
And then I tried to verify the SBOM, but used it the other way around. So from the build system, it's fairly easy to generate a bill of material. But how do you prove that it's correct? And that you can only do if you reproduce in an isolated environment with source code that is vetted and analyzed.
Yeah, and there's a lot of interesting discussion on modular software, what should be included there. Like the cProxy Camellia, we have over 100 modules. Each module have their own dependencies. So if you include Camellia and you include in your configuration the usage and activate 10 modules, should your SBOM include everything, or should you be able to cancel out the stuff you're not activating in your product? You don't even have the binaries in your product. So there's a lot of issues in regards to SBOM that will force us to keep the discussion alive and develop best current practices here.
Yeah, because
there's also a problem with naming. Like if I take a random software like curl, which isn't random, but anyway, if you check on GitHub, there are many forks of curl or any open source project. So which one do you use? And they can have different code. And that's why there's something called package URLs that is recommended to use in SBOMs to point to the version you are actually using. But we had cases in Asterisk, for instance, where a package maintainer in FreeBSD took our code, added a lot of patches with new functions, and still called it Asterisk because he didn't want to contribute for some reasons to the main project. Now, that Asterisk can have vulnerabilities that we haven't got in the main project, or the other way around. So what should be in the SBOM? So there are many questions surrounding this. It's not simple.
No, but you just described, I call that an aggregator. That's something that sits in between the original source and what you have in the project.
But if the aggregator modifies the source with its own code, then we have a problem.
Yeah, and that's what aggregator do. I found in Alpine, they contribute with a lot of patches that are local to Alpine.
Yep.
Some of them are good.
But I'm not saying it's bad, but it's a different version with different vulnerabilities.
Yeah. So it depends if you have curl, if it originates from Red Hat or SUSE or Alpine, you have different.
And Microsoft curl is another code base.
So. Exactly.
But we will have to come back to this and learn as we move along.
I got a text message with a question, which is kind of interesting. Sorry?
A secret question. Okay. Go on.
Well, I'm going to read it, so it's not secret, or at least not anymore. Quote, is the software put into market, even if it's a custom delivery to one customer as a consultant service. The risk is the same or higher, but does the consultant or is the consultant bound by CRA when the agreement with the customer tells the responsibility is the customer's responsibility?
That's an interesting question. I mean, did the consultant place the product on the market? I don't think so. It was a custom build. The customer will be responsible, but yeah, it's an edge case. If the consultant owns the source code and the rights and can sell it to a second customer in the same shape and code, then the consultant is properly becoming a manufacturer.
Yeah, that's a good question. My view is, wait a minute, I just got a phone call I need to take, so excuse.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, there are many edge cases, and we will have to watch out and keep a living discussion, and that will probably happen in many countries as well as on European Union level.
I just missed what you said, but my take on the question put forward just now in the text message is that from a company point of view, from a consultant point of view, if someone makes software for a customer, and that software is then put into, for example, a web server, or the customer in its turn puts the software onto the market, the customer should be the responsible party. However, it's pretty obvious that the customer in that case is going to put quite a lot of pressure or demands on the software company making the software so that it is compliant with the CRA.
Mm-hmm.
Which
the
means
interesting part here is that this regulation focus on the manufacturer or the economic operator that places a product on the market in formalese, but the stipulation on the customer responsibility. I mean, if the customer denies updates, and so there will probably be a question between the owners and the customer and the insurance company and others. I think that's going to be regulated elsewhere.
Well, my view is that it's pretty evident that any company making software, be it for themselves to put onto the market or working as a consultant for some other organization, they're all going to have to update their people and the processes and methods used. That's pretty evident or self-evident, and it's going to cause a lot of need for education and stuff like that. And I guess most companies are going to find that there's a shortage of knowledgeable consultants and people to do these things.
Yes. There's also, on the global market, there's also a lot of discussions about the process of shifting security left. That means that instead of having security experts checking and testing your final product, you need security people to be involved in the development, to be educational, to be helpful, and to be part of the building process. So you shift them left closer to the design and development of the product. And that's going to require, for some security people, new skills in being helpful and educational instead of saying, "Ha, I found a problem here," to prevent problems.
Also, not just that, an old security dinosaur like me, we're going to have to do things differently. But additionally, and perhaps even more importantly, the developers, the developing organization needs to get their people up to scratch as far as security is concerned and how to make secure software. So I think it's going to be some kind of an interaction where security and developers and above all, management needs to understand and help and work together.
Yep. I mean, I had an interesting discussion with a friend of mine who's an expert in agile processes, discussing, I mean, the PM needs to prioritize security issues top. And for the first coming 12 months after the legislation is in place, it will probably only be CRA work, and new cool features, blinking lamps or GUI features will be put on hold. And that will affect a lot of things for them. But what if the PM doesn't understand that he or she has to do this? That's very interesting in seen from the agile process. I promoted putting someone else in that could override and balance the PM, but that wasn't popular.
Okay. Any other thoughts or comments, or just?
Oh, it touched two areas. One is the product that you can describe in SBOM. The other is the processes that comes around. If you sit as a consultant, you have obligation. If that's translated, that have to drop everything that you're doing and then take care of all legacy due to CRA. That will kill you. The other thing, if we find tooling and formats that are approved when you hand over your contribution and it's accepted, then you don't have to respond if a customer comes back to you. I mean, you can end up in endless situation, come back, you have a problem you delivered 2 years ago as a consulting and then claim CRA, and then you have to work pro bono due to this.
I think there are some lawyers that are going to have to write good agreements. But you're right.
It's going to be interesting. But in this process, the short term, define the gap, I think many products will not be able to bring forward. You have to define now that they're end of life and start working on the replacement. And you have a very short time to come up with a replacement product. But I think that's just where this leads us.
And I think this current product, that's a swarm of different ecosystem. For one, it's not doable at all. We're talking COBOL. For other one, I think Go, Python, and Alpine. It's just a much smaller gap. It's doable.
Yeah,
but
now we're coming into religious questions about selecting development tools and stuff.
No, but you have areas where you have low-hanging fruits and you can accomplish fully traceable supply chain.
Yep.
And then there are other ecosystems that are not designed for being traceable at all. And then you can inject as much resources as you have. It won't help you because it's bad design from the beginning.
Yeah, that's what the Alpha Omega project targeted. They realized that, for instance, PyP, which is used for all the Python libraries, was really insecure, had no namespace protection, no two-factor authentication, nothing. So they put in development resources to modify all of that. And they're targeting one by one of the larger ecosystems in open source. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I think we're reaching the end of this seminar. I really like the discussions. I'm looking forward to seeing you all again.
I was late to the party. Is there any on repetition Should we follow up on
We
this?
will certainly run the introduction again, so you're welcome.
Yeah, okay.
Also, this session today has been recorded, as was the last
The Swedish edition. Yeah.
the Swedish edition. If you're interested, we can put this so that you can reach the recording and watch it afterwards.
Yep.
And also your slides, I think, was very good, Olle.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will upload them to SlideShare
Ja.
very soon.
Excellent. Tack så mycket.
Ja.
Thank you.
Ja.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye now.